Today we're talking about a particular use of the perfect tense, the perfect of allegory. But before that, let's take a quick look at what the perfect tense in general tends to represent. Not tends to represent, but tends to represent. So the perfect tense generally speaks about an event or an action in the past with effects that move on into the present. So to give an example, I'm going to use a perfect passive in English. He has been tattooed. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that sometime in the past, this he, whoever that he is, was tattooed. And the tattoo presumably stays with him into the present, right? So the event or the action is the tattooing that happened in the past, but the effect of the tattooing, the tattoo itself, continues on into the present. What's this pluperfect thing? Sometimes you hear people talk about pluperfect. A pluperfect is just like the perfect, except the effect doesn't carry on into the present. It carried on for some period of time after the action or event, but terminated before the present. That's not that important, but there's the distinction between perfect and pluperfect. Now, let's get to our perfect of allegory. The perfect of allegory uses the perfect tense, usually invoking an Old Testament story, an Old Testament event, and applies the meaning of it to the present. So that's why we call it a perfect of allegory, because we're treating the Old Testament event allegorically to communicate truth about a present situation. So it's not that the thing, it's not that the action or the event of the past is necessarily carrying on into the present, or even the effect of it, like the tattoo. The notion here is that it's treating the past like it's a part of the present, because, number one, we're still talking about it, so in that sense it is part of the present, and number two, because it has some instructional relevance for the present, where we're going to learn something from that activity, from that action in the past, and apply it to ourselves or to some audience in the present. We're going to take a look at three examples of this quickly. Our first comes from Galatians chapter 3, verse 18. This is from the ESV, and I've included the perfect of allegory in Koine. For if the inheritance comes by the law, it no longer comes by promise, but God gave it to Abraham as a promise. And here, gave is kekaristai. Kekaristai is the perfect middle indicative third person singular of charizomai, to grant a favor or a gift. So we would expect an aorist tense verb here. God gave Abraham the promise. But simply in the past, he gave Abraham the promise. It's a historical event that happened once in the past, right? But here we get kekaristai, we get it in this perfect tense, because we want, or I should say, Paul wants us to understand that the way we receive promises from God, the things that are promised to us from God are similarly given, granted as a favor through promise and not through law keeping. He wants us to apply the same thing. So the lesson is present. The inheritance from God is offered by promise, not by law. Let's stick with Abraham, but we'll move to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and the term offered up here is prosenenoken, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son. So, prosenenoken is perfect active indicative third person singular. It comes from prosphero, which means I carry toward, or I bear forth, right? I bring forth. So he's bringing Isaac forward as a sacrifice, and then was prepared. He put him on the altar He was prepared to sacrifice Isaac. But again, we would sort of expect an aorist, right? Because the bringing forth of Isaac is a historic event that happened once. He's not still offering. Isaac does not remain on the altar to this day, right? We know that that's not the case historically, but the bringing forth of Isaac to sacrifice him remains in as much as we're still talking about it. We're still learning about faith from that event. And therefore we use the perfect of allegory to take that historical event and teach a present day lesson. In Hebrews 11, we get that hall of faith, all these people who acted in these powerfully faithing ways, and we learn from those faithing ways, right? The last one we're going to look at today is from John chapter 6, verse 32. This is Jesus speaking. Jesus then said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven." Let's look at the whole saying of Jesus in Koine. "Ou Moises dedoken humin ton arton ek tu huranu." So Moses, right? Moses, ou dedoken, has not given human to you, has not given what to you? Ton arton, the bread, ek tu oranu, from heaven. So Moses hasn't given you the bread from heaven. Next, the next group below. But or rather, hopater mu, my father, didosin, humin, is giving to you, ton arton ek tu oranu ton aletheon, is giving to you the true bread from heaven. So they're looking back to the manna from heaven story, right? Jesus invokes the manna from heaven story, which evokes that memory, that corporate memory in the people of the Israelites who've left slavery in Egypt and who are wandering in the wilderness, and God provides them bread from heaven via manna on the ground that they collect and bake into these oil cakes and have food, right? This is an event that happened in the past, and unlike the other two events with Abraham, this was not an event that happened once. It happened night after night after night for a period of time. So we probably wouldn't expect an aorist telling of this. It could be an aorist. It's not Moses giving you bread in the wilderness. We might expect an imperfect verb. Moses wasn't giving on a continual basis at some time in the past bread from heaven, but rather my Father is, didosin, giving you bread now. What kind of bread? The true bread from heaven. So look at how it's perfectly allegorical. You guys are holding on to a story about your forefathers in the wilderness that happened 13 to 1500 years prior to the time Jesus is talking. You guys cling to that story as a story of God providing for you bread from heaven, right? But what I'm telling you is, you guys are receiving now the true bread from heaven, referring to himself, and he breaks the allegory. That's why it's in the negative, right? Ou dedoken, Moses has not given to you bread from heaven. Rather, my Father is, present tense, giving you the true bread from heaven right now. The allegory, the manna in the wilderness story, as a teaching tool so that they can understand their present reality of receiving real bread, genuine bread, true bread from heaven in the person of Jesus, is why he uses the perfect of allegory, ou dedoken. Moises ou dedoken. Moses has not given you bread from heaven, but my Father is giving you true bread from heaven. The perfect of allegory, a magnificent way of taking a story that happened in the past, bringing it into the present as a teaching tool so that we can learn the lessons from those who went before us. And it's one more little piece of evidence of why grammar is great. Hope that was good for you. If it was, you know the deal, the liking, the sharing, the subscribing. And until we see one another again, Charis Kairene Humin, grace and peace to you.